Last year, Jules wrapped up 10 video games that made you pay for essential features, and you guys shared our outrage and bafflement so much, you had a bunch more to offer, so we're including your comments this time around. Whether it was a content addition or features that were present previously in the series then later taken out, or an extreme level of nickel and diming, every instance on this list is nothing less than unacceptable. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 8 video games that made you pay for essential features. Commenter edition. Number 8. The Culling. More than one match. Battle Royale action of the Culling is the perfect example of whatever the opposite of an underdog story is. Now, for one, Culling 2 launched on the same day as Fortnite Battle Royale, which is absolutely not what you want, but any pity you might have had for the developer and publisher of this game is about to evaporate real quickly. After a single week on storefronts, the game was pulled due to player criticism over the game being wildly unfinished. It was then rebooted by developer and publisher Xaviant as the Culling Origins, which restored the game to its more complete state from back in 2016. Then in early 2019, the studio said the game hadn't made enough money, so they were shutting down the servers, only to announce a year later in 2020, the game was back from the dead yet again with an absolutely wild pay-per-match model. Yes, a battle royale game that wanted you to pay for every match you played. Insanity. You were given a token for one free match per day, but after that you need to pay up. Obviously, as a Telltale game would put it, everybody disliked that. So they then changed their tune to give you 10 free games per day before you had to start paying. It's genuinely hard to think of a more consumer-unfriendly move they could have chosen, so it'll likely come as no large shock that just 6 months later, the servers were shut down again, this time for good. Number 7. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. Fast travel. Now, there's a general issue with Nintendo deciding to lock certain elements of their games behind amiibos, or amiibo. I don't know if we decided on the plural for that, but this is a really good example of one of the worst versions of that. There's Metroid Samus Returns locking its hardest difficulty mode behind an amiibo, and Link's iconic horse buddy Epona only being accessible in Breath of the Wild via the means of amiibo. Almost certainly the worst offender, though, was The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, which locked the most convenient version of its fast travel behind an amiibo. While the game does feature a fast travel system whereby you can jump between bird statues you've located, the amiibo version lets you shoot yourself up into the sky and fast travel from anywhere, which is far breezier. Obviously, this is a controversial one, especially since the Loftwing amiibo, which you needed to use the convenient fast travel option, sold out everywhere pretty much instantly. Although that's not as bad as the fact that it costs $25. Sure, you can just buy the NFC cards, which are cheaper and emulate what the amiibo does, but it's scummy that it's paywalled at all. Number 6. Dragon Age Inquisition. The Real Ending. Dragon Age isn't the first game to put significant and pretty darn important narrative content inside an endgame DLC that you have to pay for, and it probably won't be the last game to do that, but it is the one I've decided to put on this list and that you guys brought up, so let's talk about it. The Trespasser DLC came out almost a year after Dragon Age Inquisition launched, and while it's a fantastic add-on, that sort of makes its lack of inclusion in the original game even worse. As does the fact that now we know the narrative setup for the next game in the series, it's basically essential to play so you know what's going on in Dragon Age Dreadwolf. Trespasser takes place years after the events of the main game, but connects several vital narrative dots, gives you a more complete final chapter with the companions you've come to know and love, and rounds out Inquisition's somewhat lackluster conclusion. The fact that this one costs players $15 on top of the full-price game they just finished isn't great, but that's not even the worst of it. The DLC only released on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. Now, the game was available also on PS3 and Xbox 360. So if you happen to play on those older gen systems and would have liked to play the endgame DLC, you simply couldn't. Number 5. Peridot, the core gameplay loop. This one's a little left of field, but you guys brought it to our attention, so we've included it for you. Also, it's a good stand-in for any time you've been frustratingly shaken down by a mobile game which forced you to pay to play the core experience. And we mean more than the classic pay-to-play that sort of sits in the background, the insidious kind. Peridot is an AR mobile game by Pokemon Go developer Niantic, and it basically mushes together Pokemon Go with Tamagotchi vibes as you'll be taking care of and breeding pets called Peridots. That's all very well, but you're gonna need to pay if you want to breed more dots. Each needs a nest basket, which sell for $5 a pop. There are a couple of dice roll ways to get nests otherwise, but they're wildly unlikely to happen for you, so this is the only surefire way to get more pets. It's an insidious little catch, no doubt hoping to snag players who warmed to the game enough that they want to see and raise dots beyond their starter pal, as well as level up and explore new dot archetypes. While a mobile game underhandedly trying to scam your dollars and nickel and dime you isn't exactly a novel concept, it's still super crummy. Number 4, Tekken 7 Frame Data. Bandai Namco's fighter Tekken 7 released to arcades in 2015 and home consoles in 2017. While it reviewed and sold well with outlets praising the game for its new mechanics, impressive graphics, tight and exciting gameplay, and compelling characters, it's on this list, so it must have ballsed something up. What is it that it ballsed up so bad, I hear you ask, and why have I decided to use the term ballsed up? Well, for that second question, I don't really have a good answer, but for the first one, it made you pay for frame data. For the uninitiated or the uninterested in fighting games, frame data is essential to those who take the competitive nature of the genre seriously. It gives you an insight as to how many frames each action takes to execute, thereby giving you vital knowledge about what attacks, defenses, and moves play in your favor and which will leave you at a disadvantage. While dedicated fans have put the time in to create detailed websites that collate this information, the display of frame data in Tekken 7 is gated behind a paid DLC. Sure, it's only a few dollars, like $2.50, but it's the principle of the thing. Taking this feature out and then charging you for it later is like if Baldur's Gate 3 took out the top-down view and then charged you if you decided you wanted to use it. Or I don't know, like if Supermassive Games' The Quarry, their new exciting horror title, like took out the ability to like save scum death rewinds, but then was like, oh, don't worry, you can pay for the deluxe edition, which gives you death rewinds. Oh wait, they actually did that. Number 3, Destiny 2. Dungeons and almost everything else. Bungie's 2017 shooter Destiny 2 got off to a solid start, but it's been a long road for the live service shooter since its launch in 2017, and things have, well, changed a little, and you guys want it brought to light. The game went free to play in October of 2019, which was a cool thing unless you bought it full price, especially if you bought it full price in like August. Then it started charging players for a bunch of standard core gameplay features, which is a way less cool thing. Destiny the Taken King snagged a spot on Jules' list for essentially locking paying players out of the game if they didn't want to upgrade to the expansion. But Bungie is nothing but consistent, so Destiny 2 has managed to grab an entry too. Dungeons are one of the central activities you'll be able to tackle to help boost your power level and get your hands on better loot. These were originally free to all players, and now you need a pass to access them, which can only be obtained with your real-world dollars. Bizarrely, though understandably if you're Bungie and after a cash grab, these aren't included in the expansions. Instead, it'll cost you 2,000 silver, the in-game currency. Of course, you can't buy that increment of silver, so instead, if you want this, you'll have to buy 3,000 silver, which at least in Australian dollars is $45. They've also sunsetted certain content packages like the initial main story and the Forsaken expansion, which is a really pretty way of saying, remember that thing you paid for? Yeah, you can't play that anymore. Not to mention how pricey their DLC is. Sure, the game is technically free to play, but if you want to play a semi-comprehensive collection of its content, you're going to be paying well over $200. Unfortunately, the studio has now learned that they can gate content behind paywalls and then ask players to pay for it later, and they've succeeded at that, but that doesn't make it not an incredible scummy practice. Number 2, Fire Emblem Fates, the extra storyline. Recent Fire Emblem entries have gone all in on offering you faction choices where you can align yourself with different kingdoms, political figures, or houses depending on which game you're playing. In Fire Emblem Fates, you can choose between territories to throw your weight behind, but it's a little more complicated than that. The game was released in 3 different versions. Birthright and Conquest each delved into a separate storyline that focused on the same set of characters. The extra confusing and relevant part for our list is that you had to buy each of those storylines separately, and then the plot thickens because you needed the Revelation DLC if you wanted to see the true ending to either of those storylines, and that was another separate buy. I'm not playing with this, there is an enormous thread on the Fire Emblem subreddit trying to help new players understand which of the DLCs they need to pick up to play this thing properly, and it is a monster of a post. Boiled down, if you want the full experience, you're going to need to buy all 3, and even if you're happy to go with just one of the initial paths, without that final DLC, you're missing a huge chunk of the intended narrative and ending. There are also paid DLC packs on top of that include a new character, new items, storylines, maps, and a whole bunch of other things that will have you scratching your head, wondering why this couldn't have made it into any of the other packages. If you didn't grab it, then, well, you can't now because the eShop shut down last year, but honestly, it's so complicated, maybe you're better off. Number 1, The Sims 4, Growing Families and Seasons, and everything else. Nobody nickels and dimes quite as successfully and somehow without enormous fan outrage than EA with the Sims franchise. Gone are the days when you'd sit down with The Sims 1 and have a gay old time, maybe with the chunky expansions Living Large, House Party, Vacation, or my favorite, Hot Date. That's not to say EA wasn't nickel and diming you back in the 2000s, but let me put this into perspective. The original Sims had 7 expansion packs, and these were pretty big. The Sims 4 has 28 full expansion packs and 47 stuff packs and kits. Now, only one of these is free. Yeah. This has especially hit home with each new full sequel, as you know full well they could have thrown in tried and true features like Seasons, Pets, University, and Get Together. A particular pain point, apart from paying for Seasons, which is a ridiculous exclusion for a life sim, is that without 2023's Growing Together expansion, parents couldn't meaningfully influence their toddlers, children, and adolescents. Players were also given Infants as a free content update, but it kind of baited you into grabbing this expansion because without it, there's not much you can do with them. There's a reason they can get away with making the base game free now. The overarching problem with this one is that EA have fully learned they can just release a new base game without any of this stuff, and we'll just buy all the pieces when they come out, and we fall for it every single time. Personally, I won't stand for it, and I don't think you should either.